Hello class, welcome back to Economic Development, an online class adventure. In today's adventure we're going to be drawing the Solow model using two countries, Argentina and Ecuador. I chose Argentina because you were familiar with your discussion question. You'll notice I rounded some of the numbers just to make them look a little nicer. And I chose Ecuador because I don't think anybody else chose Ecuador, and that way no student gets an unfair advantage. Alright, so what we have here plotted up is a savings curve for Argentina, a GDP curve for Argentina, and a population depreciation line for Argentina. Argentina is not quite yet at the steady state. You can see the blue dot indicating that Argentina has a GDP per capita of $14,000. And if we wanted to show the steady state of Argentina, we could put a nice little star right here. Whoops, and we'll move it over just a touch. And that's going to indicate the steady state GDP for Argentina when the savings curve intersects the population curve. We're going to remember, you find the savings curve and you go up to the GDP curve. All right, so then how are we going to compare Argentina to Ecuador? Well, the first thing we know about Ecuador is poor. So what we're going to do is we're going to indicate that Ecuador only has a GDP per capita of $10,000. So I'm going to do everything for Ecuador in red. You'll notice what I did was I clicked on this blue circle and I hit Control-C to copy it, and then I hit Control-V to paste it, and I created a new circle. But I want it to be for Ecuador, so I'm going to make Ecuador's lines in red and indicate this. I'm going to move this circle down here. All right, and move this over here. You can see there's like a little bit of fidgeting around that you need to do. But let's not actually put that on quite yet. Let's move this down here. The next thing we're going to notice is that Argentina has a higher investment rate Ecuador has a higher investment rate of 27% compared to Argentina at 23%. So what we're going to need to do is draw a new savings curve for Ecuador to indicate that savings is higher in Ecuador. So notice what I did is I just copied and paste again, and then I'm just going to click on it and drag it up to indicate that the savings curve for Ecuador is higher. But again, you can cut and paste the labels. So this is the savings curve for Ecuador. And then just so that we can tell it's for Ecuador, I'm going to click on the line and I'm going to turn the line red. So we know that all red lines are for Ecuador and all black lines are for Argentina. So we can already see that the steady state for Ecuador, if we just look at investment rates, is going to be higher than Argentina. Now the next thing we notice that Ecuador has a higher population growth rate. So when we draw the population growth rate curves, we're going to want to make it steeper. So let's make this steeper. And again, let's turn this curve red so that we can indicate that it's for Ecuador. And now we can draw an Ecuador steady state where the savings curve for Ecuador meets the population curve for Ecuador. So how do we indicate a steady state in this example? We're going to put stars and turn it red. Oops. Sometimes you have to mess around with it. There we go. There's red and red. All right, and that's where the steady state is. And then eventually what this means is that we are predicting that Ecuador is going to pass Argentina. Now you'll notice I could have drawn the population curve higher than this, and that would have meant that Argentina had a lower steady state. So it just means that whichever factor, population growth or savings, is having a bigger impact, that's going to determine where the steady state is. All right, so then let's put Ecuador on the curve here. So let's say that they're right here. and right here. And then we'll label it as 10,000. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that my graph isn't super to scale. I don't expect you guys to draw these graphs to scale. It's really hard to do that. So now let's see here. Sorry, sometimes this is a little bit difficult. All right, I'm going to pause it and make a little box for 10,000. All right, while I was paused there, I made a box for 10,000. So basically what I've done is I've drawn new curves in comparison to my base country. For you guys, the base country is going to be the United States. In the cases where savings is higher in your country than the United States, you'll put your savings curve above the United States. In cases where your investment rate is lower than the United States, you'll put your investment curve below. And same thing with population growth. In cases where population growth is higher, you'll have your population growth higher. And in cases where population growth is lower, you'll have your population growth lower. All right, well, let's go back to Ecuador for a second. One of the things that I didn't have on this graph is we know from our discussion that Argentina's GDP per capita grew 197% over the last 20 years. Comparatively, Ecuador grew only about 135% over the last 20 years. All right, well, why might this be? So this is the final part, and this is the part that, you know, we sort of didn't talk about as much in the videos. So one thing you've noticed is that I have drawn Argentina and Ecuador on the same GDP per capita curve. Now, one thing that could happen is because of traps in Ecuador, such as the natural resource trap, they have a whole bunch of gas, or because of bad governance. I know both Ecuador and Argentina probably have bad governance, but there's some indication that Ecuador might have a slightly worse governance. It's possible that because of productivity, that Ecuador is on a different GDP per capita curve. Let's draw that. Okay, well, while I paused it, I redrew the curve for GDP per capita in Ecuador. And I'm going to move my steady state now a little bit lower. And the reason we're dropping the curve here is that the production, even with the same amount in Argentina and Ecuador, even with the same amount of capital, Ecuador makes more. You know what I think is going to be a little bit easier? I'm going to pause it again, and I'm going to show you just with the GDP curve lines. Okay, class, here's the final piece to the puzzle. Now, one of the things that some of you found in your discussions was that your country grew more slowly despite being poorer and having higher investment rates and lower population growth rates. So remember, countries should go faster if they're poorer, have higher investment rates, or lower population growth rates. So we had two countries, one really rich country with low investment and high population growth rates, and one really poor country with high investment and low population growth rates. We would expect that country to grow faster. But one of the things you'll notice is that some countries, despite having high investment and low population growth rate, particularly bottom billion countries, have lower GDP per capita growth rates. Now, one of the reasons this is that when you have a trap like a civil war or a natural resource curse or being landlocked, your productivity curve is going to move down. So in the second video that you saw, the video changed where the production curve was based on the letter A, the technology curve. So one of the things that I would argue is that Ecuador might grow more slowly than Argentina, even though it has a higher investment and essentially the same population growth rate and is poor, because Ecuador has a lower productivity rate. And this could be because of a natural resource trap in Ecuador. If you're not familiar with Ecuador, it it found a large oil deposit. So what I've drawn up here is the relationship between GDP per capita and capital per worker. I should label my axes, which I'll do. Okay, now that the axes are labeled, what you can see is that no matter how much capital per worker Ecuador has, at the same level of capital per worker, it's going to have less GDP per capita. What that means is it's less productive, that they take each unit of capital per worker and they produce less stuff. When we draw the savings curve, this means that even if Ecuador saves the same percentage of money as Argentina, its savings curve is going to be below. And in fact, its savings curve could be below that of Argentina, even if it has a higher savings percentage. So when you're talking in your paper about how a trap could be affecting the model, what you're going to want to do is to redraw the graph, or at least discuss about how traps lower productivity. All right, I hope that helps. I'm happy to try to answer more questions or to try to create more videos to clarify this. Really, what you want to key in on is that second video and the change in A. And instead of changing ideas or changing technologies, you can think about it as countries with conflict or natural resource traps are going to have lower A. In other words, that's going to be lower productivity. All right, again, please contact me if you have any questions.